Welcome to MACMA's Audience Architect, where we are crafting the future of audience engagement. Our mission is to dive into the intricacies of the ever-evolving media and publishing landscape through the sharp lens of audience and marketing professionals. Each episode will unravel the meaning and perspective on trends that are shaping the industry. Welcome to episode number 12 of the Audience Architect podcast. I'm your host, Carla Zanoni. Let's architect the future. Today's guest is Madeleine White. Madeleine White is VP of Marketing at Pool and co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Audiencers, spearheading the company's global expansion and providing digital publishers with the tools, expertise, and inspiration needed to succeed in their membership and subscription strategies. With a deep understanding of the digital publishing industry, Madeleine has developed a strong grasp of the challenges and opportunities that publishing brands face in engaging, monetizing, and retaining their audiences. Her expertise and insights have made her a sought-after speaker at various events, both virtual and in person, including those organized by FT Strategies, Google News Initiative, and Wanifra. Through her work at Pool and The Audiencers, Madeleine is committed to empowering digital publishers with the knowledge and resources they need to thrive in an increasingly competitive landscape, helping them build lasting relationships with their audiences while achieving their business goals. She also plays a key role in organizing and hosting The Audiencers' own events, further cementing her position as a thought leader in the digital publishing space. In today's episode, Madeleine and I talk about the insights she's gleaned from dozens upon dozens of conversations with industry leaders around trends, technologies, effective engagement strategies, and data and metrics that matter. Let's give a warm welcome to Madeleine White. Hi, Madeleine.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. I felt like a little out-of-body experience. Like that's not me you're talking about.
That's what we aim for, and you should own all of that. I'm so glad that you're here with us. I was thinking about it. Your team launched The Audiencers back in the fall of 2022, which I think is a really interesting time to come to market. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of stories to share with us. Since then, you've become a go-to resource for publishing professionals who are looking to improve audience engagement, conversion, retention. I'm wondering, can you tell us how this came to be?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you so much for those kind words on The Audiencers. It has genuinely been a whirlwind since 2022. I feel like it's been 2 months and also 20 years since that happened. But to give you a bit of kind of the background of The Audiencers, so we need to go back to when I joined the industry, or I started in the industry, and I kind of fell into it by chance. So as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm English, and I studied French at university, and I had a year abroad in Bordeaux whilst at university to study there for a year. And I had one day free, out of classes per week. And so I wanted to find an internship to kind of integrate myself into the French society. So I found an internship at Pool, and I was a translator. So I translated all of the website and the help center and half of their articles that they'd already published. And these were all in French, so translating them from French to English. And through that, I got a lot of expertise on the industry as a kind of foundation level. And when I went back to the UK, I continued to freelance for them for a bit and then started working full-time in 2021. And my goal, my job was to launch the blog fully. So I started writing articles in English. And I remember the first article I wrote was, "What is a paywall?" which is really funny to think back on. And so I published one article a week sharing expertise, and very similar to what we do now, but it was on the Pool blog. And to give you a bit of information about Pool, so we're a dynamic paywall solution. So we allow publishers to build dynamic user journeys to convert their audiences into members and subscribers. And the blog just proved really valuable for our kind of internationalization. But we saw that we're half of it was we're being held back by the fact that we're a blog for a tech company. And the other half of it was that we saw this huge gap in the market for expertise on digital audience development, because a lot of people in the industry right now are facing so many audience development challenges and digital transformation challenges, but no one's been trained in it. Everyone's come from a print background and a print mindset. And we're also, for many of us in the industry, are in print first publications. And it also, like you said, it was a very interesting time in the industry as a whole. We just passed COVID or kind of nearing the end of COVID. And there was a lot of forced digital transformation throughout that time, but almost in a way that it was needed to be so quick and fast paced that actually a lot of the foundational work wasn't being done. So we wanted to take the blog a step further. And with Marion, who is our CMO at Pool and co-founder of Pool, we launched the audiences. So the audiences goal has always been to help digital publishing professionals to better engage, convert, and retain their audiences. And when we launched, we already had a huge audience in France. We're the market leaders in France, and it's a French company. But my goal was to publish in English and to grow the international readership. And we basically went from just a few readers to now we've got over 4,000 subscribers, and we're running events across the world, which is incredible. I'm so thankful for the growth that we've achieved. And the stories that we tell on the audiences are not just from our clients, they're also from other publishers around the world. So we've got, this last month, we've published articles about Hearst US, about The Economist, The Times, people on stage at our festivals are from Bloomberg. We were in Madrid as well, so a lot of Spanish publishers. And this has given us so many insights that I think are really hard to actually access as a publisher. If you're working inside a publication, you're naturally siloed, and it's really hard to access best practices and case studies from others in the industry. And it's actually a very uncompetitive industry. So I think there's so much room for sharing ideas. And that's what we wanted to do, provide a space to share ideas and inspiration and solutions. That's the key, because there's so much talk of challenges. And of course, it's important to understand the challenges, but we want to come with the solutions. And I'm really excited about the future of the industry. And that's what we want to kind of portray through the audiences.
It warms my heart, and so many of the things that you've said resonate so much. I definitely, when I got my start, the term audience engagement, audience development didn't even exist.
Exactly.
And so what you're describing, even though that for me was many years ago, there are people currently in the industry who are having the same struggles, where a lot of it is self-taught. And I think that the work that you're doing is really seeking to professionalize. And I think there's so much alignment between what MACMA does and what the Audiences does. And to me, the more the better. So that spirit of information sharing is so important. So I'm curious, you've had lots of events, high profile events, one recently at the New York Times. You have an event coming up later this week in London. And I'm curious, what are some of the top of mind insights that you see coming up over and over again, the key topics and challenges that you plan to address and that you're also hearing your audience clamoring to better understand?
So to give you a bit of context, for the events are what we call the audiences festivals. When we're organizing them, I'm in charge of content on stage. So it's quite a powerful position, but I try to build it around trends I'm seeing, exactly that. So if I give the example of our London festival, so that's this Friday in the News UK building, we have a panel on community building, for instance. So I think communities are incredibly valuable for publishers right now. We have the rise of AI and the ease of content production. You can produce content so easily, and it's something you can get everywhere, unfortunately. But community is something that's a differentiator. It's something that humanizes your brand and can actually set you apart from others in the industry. And people come to your publication often for the content or for the engagement features, but they'll stay for the community. And I'm seeing some incredibly inspiring strategies, community building strategies across the world that we're going to be sharing on Friday. Then churn reduction is another one. I think this is a widely understood challenge, is the amount of subscribers who are churning. But the important thing is that actually I think a problem in team organization within publications is that acquisition and retention are separate often. They're different teams who don't really talk and they have different goals. So acquisition goals are about number of subscribers acquired and retention goals are about number of subscribers who stay. And if they don't talk to each other, then actually they can't really help each other achieve their goals. And their goals aren't necessarily aligned for the wider benefit of the business, which is obviously lifetime value and the number of paying subscribers in general. So the solution is obviously the foundational strategy of aligning these two teams or getting them to work better together, but also thinking of retention pre-subscription. So acquisition-minded retention and looking at those features that your most loyal subscribers have, or what kind of actions, what kind of engagement they have, and then implementing that prior to subscription. So for instance, we've seen one of our clients actually at Pool tested whether it's more valuable for lifetime value to get a user to subscribe or show them a paywall on their first article and get them to subscribe like that, or to get them to register first before subscribing. So a registration wall, then a paywall. And whilst the paywall only journey was more valuable for direct revenue straight after conversion, the registration then paywall journey was actually more valuable for revenue after 8 months. So the lifetime value of the registered first users was higher. And so that's more valuable for the business goal. But obviously acquisition teams will want to get someone subscribed as quickly as possible to hit their KPIs. I feel like I've covered like 20 different trends there. But
I'm curious. This speaks to something I wanted to talk to you about. That misalignment or not even misalignment makes it sound much more nefarious, right? A lot of this is just everybody is trying to hit their targets, their goals. Yeah. They're moving very quickly and they don't even realize that they're at odds. So I'm curious, in those conversations, when you're learning about this, what are some of the key strategies that people have put in place to improve communication, to break down those silos and get aligned on those goals?
Yeah. So I published an article on this maybe 2 weeks ago. So we do these Ask the Experts articles where I just have a challenge or a question that people keep asking me. And I just go and ask loads of people in the industry. And I did one on how to build your reader revenue team. And it was really interesting because every single person I interviewed said something different. So like everything, I think there's no one size fits all answer, unfortunately. But I think bridge roles, hiring people who are, their whole role is to be a bridge between multiple teams. I think that is it's essential. With print, a print mindset, having siloed teams worked, but it just doesn't work with digital transformation and subscription strategies. There was other companies that built or developed teams based on steps in the funnel, but the retention acquisition teams worked really, really closely together and actually had very similar goals. So their KPIs were aligned. There was other ones that they have mission teams. So they have people from across different teams in the company, but they have a shared mission of achieving X. But I think one thing that came up a lot was that even though lifetime value might be an ultimate KPI for a lot of publishers, it's really hard to understand and buy into. So you have to find basically something that every team can understand within the company, including editorial. And that they can buy into, because you're not going to buy into something you don't understand, or you're not going to know how to achieve something you don't understand. So I think the The answer is not clear and there's no one size fits all, but the key points are that you need to break down silos, that you need to have whole company buy-in and make the goals understandable and shared across across teams.
I'm curious. It's interesting to hear what you're saying about lifetime value and how difficult but amorphous it can feel to really apply it back to your day-to-day goals, especially as someone in editorial. And I certainly have had that experience, having served in a bridge role for much of my career, trying to translate. Just like your original work, right? Trying to translate this different language so that it applies and that people have that buy-in. I'm curious, are you finding that increasingly, perhaps because of the challenges that the industry is facing, that people in editorial in these different departments are starting to become not only more savvy, but interested and curious about how these business models work?
Yes, I think it depends on the company, and I think it's our role as audiences to do that, to help bring the whole company along with how we're thinking. And I think audience people play such an incredibly important role in the future of journalism. So ensuring the whole company is brought in on and understands our work is really essential. And for instance, Lars Jensen, who writes for the audiences and is brilliant, he works at Berlinske Media, incredibly intelligent guy. He does an internal newsletter to the whole company. And so he shares his learnings and does a lot of work with user needs, for instance. And I think that kind of strategy is really valuable to prove the value of the work he's doing and the value for the company as a whole. Another example is Clarin. So Clarin is the largest Spanish-speaking digital subscription publisher in the world. And they've gone through an incredibly interesting digital transformation journey. And they internally worked with audience teams and editorial to define what an article should look like if it's going to try and achieve a subscription goal versus an audience acquisition goal. So they've now split their editorial teams into 4 groups, 3 of whom write solely for subscription, and 1 writes solely for audience acquisition. So actually it's been integrated into the whole editorial organization, and each team has their own KPIs. So the ones that are writing for subscription, they are tracking conversion rates and the number of subscribers that read their articles. And that kind of integration into their way of thinking and celebrating success in terms of subscription rates or conversion rates or whatever, I think is really, really valuable. And it's different for each publication. And there's been so many different ways of doing that I've heard across the industry. But I think the essential is to help editorial understand the value of our work.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm very excited that you just mentioned Clarín. From Argentina, so I'm very excited that they are doing all of this work. And I know you've recently had an article on this, and I would suggest that everybody read it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also going to do a shout out to Ismail, who wrote that article, who published the book.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm not going to show my Spanish accent by pronouncing the name of the book, but in English it's Clarin Updated.
And that's okay. And, I won't use my French accent, so it's a treat.
I mean, my French accent's just as bad, so we won't go there. We'll stick in English.
I love it. I think so much of what we're talking about is about experimentation, right? And this system that you just described, Clarín, might work right now. It might need to change down the road. And, so many of the conversations I've had are, there's a moment where we centralize, and there's a moment when we decentralize, and then it goes back to centralization. And so a lot of that is about a spirit of curiosity and experimentation. I'm curious, what are some of the best practices that you've heard for running effective tests and experimentation, and then interpreting those results? What should we be learning?
So I love your the way you said it there, the way you explained testing, because it's a continuous mindset. And that's why we really try to focus on the solutions and sharing success stories and case studies on the audiences, because we want to inspire ideas, inspire readers to go out and test something themselves. And just because it's worked with Claret doesn't mean that it's going to work with someone else, or like you said, work with them in a few years' time. So I guess making sure that you're continuously testing is the essential best practice. It depends what you're testing, ultimately. I mean, you can test something as small as the wording on a paywall, or test reorganizing your whole team. Mm-hmm. So I guess it depends on that. We have a lot of examples of innovative tests and innovative solutions to these challenges that started off as a test. And I guess it depends what you're testing.
Yeah. I think I think so much of it is really that defining the parameters of running those tests, and then agreeing upon beforehand how you're going to interpret those results.
Yeah.
But also leaving a little bit of room for magic, right? There's that quote, right? There are the unknowns that we don't even know, the unknown unknowns. And so leaving room for that, I think, is really important, but also preparing as much as possible in advance so that you have an agreed upon parameter that you're working within. And
I guess being prepared to fail and accepting that failure is not failure. I think that's really key as well in general in innovation, having this beginner's mindset and continuously trying to learn and improve, and taking failure as actually not failure. We've learned something.
Right. Exactly.
And as long as you act on it and improve, then that's all that matters.
Right. What a cultural shift. It's
I know.
I think we could talk about this for the rest of the hour. I feel it's such a challenging thing, but the spirit of it, I think, is what's the most important thing for leaders, and then for everyone to pick up. I'm wondering, at the beginning you were talking about community building, and something that I've always felt is that we don't actually build communities. I feel that communities happen organically. We tap into them. We identify them as good audience professionals. We learn how to define them and understand what motivates them. And then we create this space, right? This container for them to thrive. And it strikes me that that's exactly what you've done with the audiencers. And I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about how that really came to be and what you've learned from holding that space. And also, where do you see the parallels in the industry? What are some of those best practices to really sustain and allow that community to thrive?
Yeah, it's really funny because, I mean, the audiences were obviously media, but we're speaking to media professionals. And so much that we talk about, we need to do ourselves. And we're only two people on the audiences, so it's sometimes hard. But we really try to do it where we can. And it happened exactly like you just described. It happened organically. We've started from the outset. We've got a very much a conversion experts mindset. So we were thinking about audience development from kind of the get-go, and we don't have the challenge of coming from print or anything like that. So we're in a very lucky position. And we started off with half of our articles, or our articles from external contributors, were always free, always completely unlocked. Then on the articles written by myself or Marion or one of the other team internally, a reader would be blocked on the second article and asked to sign up to our newsletter, what we call a newsletter ward. And after that, you're not going to be blocked again. So that way, we're not only leaving readers to engage a bit in our content, like they're getting one article for free, or I say for free, but you know what I mean, one article without being blocked, and then the newsletter. But then we're continuously engaging them with our newsletter every 2 weeks and sending them more content and developing this engagement over time. But this kind of often reaches a limit, and we've seen this amongst clients as well. And I talk a lot about registration and the importance and value of registration, and we've now implemented registration ourselves. So registration is when an anonymous reader becomes known. So they create a free account. And that is valuable in the wider industry because it increases ad revenue. You can target advertising, you can collect first party data, and it increases engagement, like it can double or triple page views and numbers of articles read, as well as then naturally through this increased engagement, increased propensity to subscribe in the future. And whilst a newsletter will, someone's still anonymous, a registration wall, after someone's passed through a registration wall, you can track their every visit and see what articles they're interested in, and ultimately personalize their experience, give them some more value in exchange for creating an account. And we've seen this or advised this to a lot of our clients to go from that newsletter strategy to then registration. So that's what we've done recently, is we launched our registration wall. But that kind of came off the back of seeing our community develop over time. We'd started our in-person events last autumn. So we had one in Paris and one in London. And it was kind of it was the proof of what we'd been doing for the past year. So we'd seen numbers grow, but numbers on a page is nothing compared to actually seeing people in front of you and having people say lovely things about you and your events. It really, I think, boosted our confidence in what we're doing and proved the value of the community. I think even if we hadn't had half of the sessions on stage at those first events, and we'd simply brought audience people together into a room and provide some drinks, I think it would have been a good day. And so many people said this, that actually they loved the fact that they could turn to anyone in the room and know that they were facing similar challenges and they were an audience person. And even at our Toronto event earlier this year, someone from Graham Media Group came on stage and they started off by just saying, isn't this incredible that audience people have their own event? And I felt that was incredible. So that's kind of grown organically. And then, like you said, we've created more space for the community to develop. So Marion had the great idea of launching WhatsApp groups. We saw the new functionalities on WhatsApp, and WhatsApp's a bit more widely used in Europe and Spanish speaking countries than the US. So we launched that, and that's been great. Then registration and an account space. And we've also been working with our partners at Viafora to add comments at the end of articles. So the idea is that we can increase engagement and ask questions after an article. And I admit I haven't had much time to develop this community on the site, but that is our goal in the future, is to try and really, fuel this community and help encourage people to participate in it. And yeah, this is what we're seeing on our clients as well, and publishers around the world, is they're losing a lot of traffic from social media. And so actually by creating their own community on their website, they're owning the audience again.
Right. It's interesting. With some of the clients that I've been working with, I'm hearing the same things. Really bringing, after a few years of of publishers disbanding comments, bringing comments back and really investing in that quality conversation. Another platform, you mentioned WhatsApp. I definitely think that that's a space, a third-party tool that can be used to do that. Substack, excuse me, is also very powerful there. It seems that building on that newsletter strategy that you're describing as well, once you've signed up for a newsletter, if you are having a social commenting type relationship, there does seem to be a higher level and higher quality of conversation that's taking place there than what I've seen on social media.
Yeah, well, it's a two-way conversation, isn't it? And I think when we think of the word community, there's a lot of assumption that it's just about commenting and forums, but I truly believe that newsletters play a key role in community building, and actually they can help develop the conversation in a one-directional sense. And I personally try to put my voice into the newsletter, and I think that's what a lot of publishers play on, as well as their editors, the voice of their editors. But then the commenting allows the reader to have a voice and to have their say and to react to other readers, as well as to sometimes interact with the editor themselves. So our community panel in London this week, for instance, we've got someone from the Telegraph and the Times coming on stage, and they've both said how they've gone from commenting just as a simple functionality to then building on that, and now they have ask the editor hours where the editor will come into the comment section and say, okay, I'm live here for an hour. I'm sitting by my computer and all I'm doing is replying to your comments. So you've got almost a live Q&A. And then developing on that, they've got video Q&As, they're having polls, they're integrating that into articles, and they're turning to their biggest commenters or the most engaged commenters to interview them for subjects for articles. So they're turning the community into content and back again. And one thing I think is really important to mention when we're talking about community is that at the Times, they've made it obligatory for you to use a real name when you're commenting. And I think they've now reached something like 80 to 90% of their commenters are now real names, and they went through a whole process, and they said it's taken a long time and it did damage in a way for a short period their number of comments, but it's proven really incredibly valuable for their reducing toxicity in the comment section. And actually it's real people. We should use our real name. We should really humanize these communities.
And I think that goes both ways, what you were describing about somebody from editorial coming in and having conversations and not having it feel like I'm part of this community and maybe I'm communicating with other readers, but I never have a conversation with the brand. I never have a conversation with the editors. There's something about that two-way conversation that's incredibly important. And I think it also sets norms. If you feel like you're being heard, then you are going to respond with certain norms. And then that leads to reduction of toxicity, as you're describing. Exactly. And we'll be right back. Hey, Audience Architect podcast listeners, mark your calendars for September 26, 2024, and get ready to return to the Windy City to join us at the Chicago Yacht Club for a game-changing event hosted by the Media and Audience Content Marketers Association. Join us as we explore the theme, Unlocking Audience Loyalty, Mastering Email Engagement and Monetization. Picture this. Leaders from across publishing, media, and email sharing cutting-edge insights on next-gen audience engagement strategies, unraveling and optimizing KPIs, innovating premium newsletters and monetization, and personalization's implementation at long last. Plus the influence of email infrastructure decision makers on publishing and media. This isn't just another industry event. This is your chance to learn from the best, participate in dynamic dialogues, and challenge legacy mindsets to seize the opportunities of tomorrow. But here's the catch. This event will not be recorded. You've got to be there in person to soak it all in. Keep an eye out for event announcements and registration details. This is one date you don't want to miss. See you in the Windy City. The MACMA event at the Chicago Yacht Club, where innovation meets inspiration. Don't miss it. And now back to our show. I'm wondering, I love those innovative ways. It also warms my heart that we're going back to some basics, right? This is what the internet was like in the beginning, and there was a sense of that community. It makes me so happy to hear that audience engagement is at the core of audience development work. So much of what we talk about is being data led and about the numbers and driving all of our actions. But there's real power in what you're describing within these communities. I'm curious, maybe for yourself or what you've heard from others, from an editorial perspective, how do you go about assigning stories and really deciding what you're writing about? How much of that is coming from the community? How much of that is coming from just your editorial gut?
At the audiences.
Yes.
So I've been asked this a few times, and I find it really hard to answer because I never run out of things to write about.
That's good.
because I think I don't know where it comes from. I'm very active on like LinkedIn, and I try to read a lot. I receive a lot of newsletters. I stay very active in the industry. And also I think one of the valuable positions that I personally am in is that I have the time to go benchmark, 100 paywalls and take screenshots and then put it into an article. And through that, I think it gives me the time and the space to be able to see innovative strategies without necessarily them being sent to me. But equally, increasingly more people are sending ideas, and we're so open to that. I think that's how half of our articles have been produced or have come to be on the website. It's just people coming to us saying, "Oh, we've done this at our publication. Would love to talk to you about it. Would love to share." And equally, us going to events and hearing people speak, meeting people in person is my favorite thing to do, and just hearing what people are doing, and also giving a voice to some of the smaller publications, because obviously we all know how extraordinary the New York Times is, and definitely want to continue to highlight their work. But there's so many other innovative strategies and features going across the industry. And even, a tiny publisher in a regional publisher in a tiny town in France is doing some really innovative stuff that other people could test and try out. And almost they're in quite a vulnerable position. They have maybe limited resources, so they're having to be more innovative. And I find that exciting, and it's a beginner mindset again, or a startup mindset that I think can be really valuable for innovation. And so, I think that's what we try to do as well, is give a voice to those lesser known publications.
Yeah, and I think what you're highlighting is so incredibly important. Those smaller newsrooms or media brands, they have to be extra discerning before they make decisions to experiment. Innovation costs something. And when you have a limited amount of staff, which I've worked on super small teams and in startup mode, community journalism, all the way to global spaces. And that discernment sometimes can get lost because of some of the silos that we were talking about earlier. I think it's really interesting that you did not mention once taking a look at how articles are performing from a page view perspective or engagement perspective. And maybe that's not, what's that about? Tell me what that means.
I guess there's only two of us. So I do look, I do look. But then again, trends in the industry are constantly changing. And so I base it a lot on the trends in the industry or what people are talking about. And if, for instance, if we take the example of WhatsApp communities kind of came out of nowhere when WhatsApp launched their new feature. And I wouldn't know that without having kind of kept up with industry on LinkedIn or see what publishers are trying out, and actually heard about it through a Spanish publication that's only on WhatsApp, and heard about this and then interviewed them. And that was the first article that was published on WhatsApp, but it performed really well. So I guess staying on top of trends isn't necessarily always about looking at how our past articles have performed. And often at our events, we can see quite well quite easily how people react to the conversations, and I guess it's I don't know how to explain. I guess it's also just trying to be leaders in the industry, and that means that sometimes looking back at how other articles have performed isn't necessarily the way to move forward.
That resonates so much. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And
I'm just finding excuses for not having looked at the data.
You're speaking to the right person. I don't know how our audience will respond to it, but I think it has to be a mix of qualitative and quantitative. And exactly to your point, you don't want to be an Ouroboros just chasing your tail.
Exactly.
If you are a leader, you are uncovering trends and insights that people don't even know that are important yet until they've stumbled upon it. I'm curious. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I'll just add that we also have data on our registration wall, or like the old newsletter wall, and we see how many people give us their email per week. And so we measure that as our primary metric, and that's always been our primary metric. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. That's always been our primary metric, and that's allowed us to have a real conversion first, audience first approach rather than thinking about page views and acquisition. And I guess that's always been a great KPI for us, great way of understanding how well stuff's performing. And it's really interesting actually to look at that and see that when we publish an article about a UK-based publication, we get a lot of people sign up from the UK. And so before our UK events, I kind of make an effort to publish lots about UK publications so that then people in the UK hear about us. So that's also part of our strategy.
Interesting. I was curious about your efforts to become more global and to represent globally. So as I said, I was very excited when you were dipping into Argentina and the global South in general. And I'm curious, what does that look like for you? How do you expand globally while not diluting the engaged audience that you have?
It's a great question. And I think part of it is about proving that those in the US, it's actually is valuable for them to look into Europe and vice versa, just as to an example. And I guess that means that if we can prove that point and prove the value in doing that, and always looking at other publishers, whatever size they are, wherever they are in the world, proving the value of that, then I guess we're never diluting the engagement that we're going to get. But equally, I think our focus has always naturally been on Europe, just because we're based in France and I'm from the UK. But by we did our New York and our Toronto event. And I think looking back, that was partly because we started seeing so much engagement from that side of the world. But also, I think me and Marion just have these crazy ideas and then end up doing them. And I think those two festivals might have been that kind of situation. But so the US is less of a focus, I guess, right now, but just because of limited resources, but would love to be able to expand more over in the US and do more festivals over there.
So I agree with you that I think so much is transferable and we're always learning. I'm curious, are there any areas where you feel that there really are regional differences and that it's not quite transferable? What do you see there? I
really like this question because I find it so interesting because it's really intertwined with culture. Because, for instance, if we think about, it's becoming less prominent now, I think, but over the past few years with paywall and subscription journeys. So the question of how many articles to offer for free before the paywall. I wrote an article about it on Winifred recently, and it's it seems like a simple question, right? But there's so much involved. And actually, cultural differences plays a huge part in that. And Lars Jensen wrote a great article about it as well, about how in the Nordic countries, actually a freemium approach is much better because they divide content into longer form articles and more kind of audience acquisition, page view focused articles. So in doing that, if they were to implement a metered model, for instance, so metered is when you have X number of articles for free before the paywall. It could be any article that you fall on with the paywall. So if you end up on a shorter, quote unquote, lower quality article, and that's the one that's blocked by a paywall, you're less likely to want to click through and subscribe. So that's difference. I think it's very different to the US, where I think the metered model is a lot more common. But in a recent report, they were discussing about how freemium models are kind of spreading a bit more across the world and becoming more prominent outside of Europe. But ultimately, I think dynamic models are going to be the ones that are going to overtake everything and adapting to the user rather than to the type of content necessarily.
Right. That makes total sense. I'm curious, in this vein, you had an article recently where you talked about a successful audience conversion journey, that it's about striking the right balance between engagement and frustration for each individual reader. So I am fascinated by behavioral economics, and I think anybody in this world should be studying that. What do you mean by that balance between engagement and frustration?
Yeah, it's maybe one of the kind of sentences or stories that I've told the most, because I think it's the most important and the most essential to implement and into our digital subscription strategies. So basically, every reader has a different level of engagement, right? And our goal is to try and increase their engagement. And we can keep increasing their engagement through newsletters, through quality articles, through commenting, community building, everything we've talked about today. And that's great, but that's not how we monetize content and how we pay our journalists. So you have to frustrate readers a bit in order to get something back in exchange. So we call it a value exchange. And that's when, say, you block with a newsletter wall, a registration wall, or a paywall, in order to stop a reader or a user from accessing something engaging, like the content, for instance, and you ask them for something in exchange for access. And the level of frustration that you give someone should depend on the level of engagement, because if someone's really engaged, a little bit of frustration is exactly what they need to be able to get value from them. Whereas if someone's not very engaged and you frustrate them a lot, say a paywall on the first article they read on the first visit to your website, they're not engaged enough in order to want to partake in that value exchange. So ultimately, if every single user that comes to our site has a different level of engagement, that means we need to frustrate them in a different way, in a different amount, to counteract that engagement. And someone who, for instance, comes from social media, they're often less engaged, or they don't necessarily know us yet. So we might want to frustrate them just a tiny bit with a newsletter wall, say on the second article. So then their level of engagement, we give them a chance to increase engagement before frustrating them. While someone who comes to our website via a newsletter, a free newsletter that they receive every day and they open every day, they're already pretty engaged. And so we can frustrate them quite a lot, maybe with a paywall directly or registration wall, in order to get some value off them. And this whole idea is that dynamic models, the future of digital subscription models, and they allow you to adapt your reader journey based on the user's profile or context. So it could be based on their source of traffic, based on their location in the world. So if you're a regional French publisher, maybe you don't want to block anyone outside of France because then they're not engaged enough. Or you could block the segment based on level of engagement, based on device use, so mobile versus desktop, or based on any other parameters that you've got in your system.
I think that's the most pleasant description of frustration that I've ever heard in my life. So I think it makes a lot of sense. If you want to put that piece of friction in front of someone,
Yes.
that's not going to drive them away. That's actually going to make them feel like they've worked for something and they're willing to give you that value. I think that makes perfect sense. It's very smart. I'm curious, as we start wrapping up, I know you have your next Audiencers Festival at the end of this week.
Yeah.
You told us a little bit about some of the themes that you'll be addressing. I'm curious, what do you hope that your audience will walk away with later this week after that event?
So I've just been working on my introduction for the
we can do a practice dry run.
So my introduction, I introduced the theme for the day is solutions, and that's what I really want to transfer and provide to our attendees. So my goal in the introduction is to smile the whole time and show my excitement for the industry, because I just think that there's so much, we mentioned this earlier, there's so much talk of challenges, and obviously it's essential to understand the challenges in order to overcome them, but you also need the solutions. And I think I am seeing so many incredibly innovative strategies around the world that just actually really excite me and are really interesting and fun and different and show the possibilities that are out there. And I think that by highlighting those innovative strategies and suggesting solutions and giving as many ideas as possible, hopefully we can inspire people to do the same and to test new ideas and bring some energy and excitement to the industry that I think's been facing a lot over the last few years. And there's so much talk about news avoidance and attracting younger readers and high churn rates. So yeah, the goal is to be positive at this event, and I hope we achieve it.
I'm having spoken to you, I'm certain that you will, and grateful for that approach, because there is a lot of doom and gloom and some of it very well warranted. And I also think that there is no more important moment in our lifetime than now to really be thinking about the health of this industry, for democracy, for the health of our communities, for all of those really important reasons. So we have heard your accent. You have said you are from the UK, living in Paris. I always like to end with something personal. I've shared with you, I'm a big Francophile, but I will not speak in French. I will not embarrass myself. I'm curious, Two questions. You recently came to New York. You told me that you fell in love with it. I'm wondering if you could tell me one thing that you love doing in New York and one thing that we should all do in Paris when we get to visit.
Great question. In New York, I just loved walking around. I have a younger sister who's 22, and she always bigs me up as well. And she sent me a message when I was walking around New York saying, Madeleine, I hope you're living your main character life. And I was walking around with, I wore like these silver shiny trousers for the Audiences Festival. And I was in heels and walking around with my iced coffee in New York with the sun shining. And I just felt like exactly that. It was incredible. And just walking around the city was amazing. So I loved that. And in Paris, I'm not going to lie, just the food, eating all going to boulangeries for baguettes and wine. And one of my favorite things to do in summer is to go by the Seine, go by the river and walk along the Seine. And it's unfortunately going to be blocked during the Olympics, and I'm really going to miss it. Right. So if you're in Paris, go for a walk along the Seine at sunset. It's the best.
Oh, the most beautiful. The most beautiful. I wish you could see the wallpaper on my computer. I'll have to take a screenshot for you. Yes. Madeleine, this has been such a pleasure. We are all rooting for you.
Thank you so much.
Our hope is that MACMA and the audiencers will have more opportunities to collaborate. Like I said at the beginning, I just think the spirit that you bring to this of collaboration and hopefulness is absolutely aligned with us, and we're so grateful that you were on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and more than happy to collaborate. This was a fun conversation.
Great. I'll see you in Paris. You'll see me in New York. We'll just coordinate all of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Audience Architect is a content service of MACMA, aka the Media, Audience, and Content Marketers Association. Supercharge your career with MACMA's paid membership. Connect with industry experts, thought leaders, and like-minded professionals. Expand your knowledge and stay ahead with networking events, webinars, and conferences. Join MACMA today for unparalleled value and professional growth. Check us out at www.the-mcma.org. That is www.the-mcma.org. Thanks as always to Lisa Pistilli and the gang at MACMA. Thanks again to MACMA for supporting the Audience Architect podcast. Shout out to our excellent producer and editor, Camilo Duque of Victoria Records, available to work on your podcast, jingle, music production, and videos. I'm Carla Zanoni, your host. Write us with your feedback on the show and topic ideas for future episodes, the good, bad, and ugly, to Bill Levine at bml0217@gmail.com. That's bml0217@gmail.com.